Full Moon Academy by Roy Malcolm. Published by Life Books. Narrated by Randall Schaefer. Chapter 1. First Moon. 6 months ago. The drop from his bedroom window down to the back garden of his home would have been frightening for any first-timer. But Aidan Morrigan had years of practice sneaking out at night. His brother, Caleb, on the other hand, was a first-timer. And that meant Aidan had to spend 15 minutes whispering to him, trying to motivate him to come on down. Caleb stood on the windowsill, eyes closed, flattening himself against the wall and window behind. One hand latched onto the steel pipe that ran along the wall. Under his breath, he was muttering what sounded a lot like a prayer. "Dude, just lower yourself and jump," Aidan hissed in a hushed manner. Tempting as it was to raise his voice at his brother, he couldn't risk waking his adoptive parents. The last time he'd been caught sneaking out, the penalty had been 2 weeks grounded. If they found out he was doing it again with Caleb, he was sure he'd be grounded an entire year. It didn't matter that he was 19 now. As long as he lived under their roof, he had to play by their rules. Or, well, he had to let them live under the impression that he was playing by their rules. "You make it sound easy," Caleb snapped, also in a hushed tone, and he glanced at the ground, a whimper escaping him. "You want me to climb back up and help you down?" Aidan asked. "You do know we haven't got all night, right? If the Farmans across the street see us, they won't hesitate to call Mom and Dad." "Look, maybe you should go without me," Caleb said fearfully. "I can't do this. I'm not insane like you are." Aidan sighed. "Yeah, I suppose that's fine." He turned and started to walk away, but after a few steps he paused and looked at Caleb. "You know, Carmen's going to ask why you didn't come. Already told her we'd both be coming. And you know, seeing as she's already there, aren't you worried that there's probably guys already hitting on her?" Caleb's eyes widened in horror then, and with no further hesitation, he leapt off the windowsill, then dropped onto a flower bed below and rolled off it onto the ground. He scrambled onto his feet immediately and began to dust himself off, spitting grass out of his mouth. Once he was done, he hurried toward Aidan. Aidan grinned at him. "You do realize I'm now going to tell her you jumped because of her?" "I'll kill you," Caleb growled. Aidan laughed gently and patted his brother on the back. "Come on. We've got to head over to Nathan's first. Murphy and Taylor should be there already." "What time are we going to get back?" Caleb asked as they made their way out of the garden and onto the street. "Mom and Dad are going to kill us if they notice we're out. You know how they get about stuff like this." "Aidan, you're far too old to be so reckless, and dragging your brother along? I'm disappointed in you. I thought you'd know better. I've spoken with your father, and we've decided that—" Aidan began, speaking in an imitation of Pharaoh Morgan. "You're grounded," Caleb finished, and the two of them laughed a little. After 7 minutes, they turned right off their street onto Bicker Street, a narrow street populated largely by shops that primarily sold oddities, as well as tall apartment buildings made of brick. Aidan tapped on Caleb's shoulder and pointed at one of the apartment buildings, at a girl in a black crop top and baggy denim trousers, paired with white sneakers. "Looks like we're not the only ones sneaking off to Nathan's rave." Nathan Christensen was probably the most famous person Aidan knew. He wasn't a celebrity or anything. In fact, he was as far from a celebrity as anyone could get. He dropped out of high school 4 years ago when he was 17, not because he was flunking or anything, but because he thought it'd be a waste of his time. With his parents constantly away on business trips, Nathan was often left alone with all the space and time he needed to satisfy his many whims. And boy, did he have many. His uncle, Chris, was also largely away from home, with most of his nights spent passed out at Diego's, a bar 6 minutes away from Nathan's place. And with that much time on Nathan's hands, he'd crafted himself a reputation for hosting the craziest parties. Parties that almost always ended with a few teenagers being whisked away by the cops for underage drinking, and Nathan forced to ask a few questions. There wasn't a single police officer in Wilmoon Town who didn't know Nathan, and there wasn't a single person between 16 and 23 who hadn't heard of his parties. The girl sneaking out of her apartment was Karen Underwood, an 18-year-old fresh out of high school who was heading off to college in New York in September. Aiden had spoken to her a few times and had bumped into her at some of Nathan's previous parties. Halfway through her climb down, she stopped and glanced down fearfully. "Do we help her out?" Caleb asked. "Yeah, but you should probably get the grass out of your hair first," Aiden said. "What?" Caleb frowned and raised a hand to his dark blonde hair. Sure enough, he found bits of grass there and hastily brushed them off with his hands, ruffling his hair a little in the process. When he was done, he narrowed his dark green eyes at Aiden. "When were you going to tell me I had grass in my hair?" "When Carmen pointed it out," Aiden shrugged, giving Caleb a mischievous grin. Their devilish grins were the only things the two of them had in common. For instance, Caleb was stocky and short, whereas Aiden was thin and tall. Caleb had blonde hair and green eyes. Aiden's hair was brown and his eyes were an electric blue. Anyone who met the both of them wouldn't believe them to be brothers, and it had taken Caleb a while after Aiden was adopted by the Morrigans to warm up to it. But they'd since become inseparable. "You're a dickhead." Caleb shoved Aiden playfully, and then the two of them hurried to give Karen a hand in getting down. Once she was down on the ground, she thanked both of them with incredibly tight hugs and pecked them on their cheeks before hurrying off. "See you at the party," she called out to them before vanishing down the street. "She's a great hugger," Caleb pointed out. "I bet Carmen is too," Aiden chuckled. "Shut up." 10 minutes later, they arrived outside Nathan's home. Nathan's place was grand for someone his age. It was a 2-story building coated in gray paint with white columns for support. There were neatly trimmed bushes running along the house's exterior. On the porch, baskets filled with colorful flowers hung from their hooks, dangling over chairs that had been left outside. And even though Aiden couldn't see the back of the house at the moment, he knew what it looked like. The massive pool, the grill, lounge sofas, alcohol kegs, and the small shed where a lot of awful decisions were made. Parked outside Nathan's home were 2 vehicles. A red truck that gleamed under the glow of the full moon, and a comfy-looking black Toyota with tinted windows and a customized plate number that simply said, Nathan. Thumping hip-hop music was playing out of the Toyota, and leaning against the red truck with their arms folded and eyes crossed were Murphy and Taylor Hawkins. Unlike Aiden and Caleb, Murphy and Taylor actually did look like siblings. They shared the same blonde hair. Murphy's was currently in a buzz cut, and Taylor had made hers all frizzy. They shared the same olive skin and the same brown eyes. Despite Taylor being 2 years older than Murphy at 22, the two of them could have passed as twins. In fact, they had similar facial structures, and the only significant differences between them was that Taylor was taller and plumper, and Murphy was short and thin. Taylor, of course, also had the better sense of humor, and it was with her that Aiden got along better. After all, she was his closest friend. Taylor was wearing a cropped purple sweatshirt atop black jeans and white sneakers, while Murphy wore a black hoodie over a white t-shirt, baggy blue jeans, and black sneakers, appearing almost like a 90s gangster. "Oh, look who finally decided to show up," Murphy scoffed and rolled his eyes. You two sure took your sweet time getting all pretty. Blame Kale, Aiden shrugged. Got scared climbing out the window again? Taylor asked. Yep, Aiden nodded. Hey, I wasn't scared, Caleb said quickly. And when they all looked at him with eyebrows arched, he stared down at his feet. I was just concerned about my well-being and the integrity of my joints, he added. Well, now that you're here, can we finally get going? Murphy sighed and reached into the pocket of his hoodie and pulled out a pack of cigarettes. He opened up the pack and handed cigarettes out to Aiden and Caleb, and then lit it for them. Aiden took a puff of the cigarette, let out a long exhale, and nodded. Yeah, sure, let's get going. He turned to face Nathan's car and knocked twice against the window of the driver's seat. Immediately, the music quieted, and a second later the window rolled down to reveal Nathan, his eyes red and his lips stuck in a wild grin. Hola, bitches, he roared. Aiden sighed. Figured. Get out, I'll drive. I'm not even going to argue. Nathan chuckled and opened up the door. He stumbled out of the car, patted Aiden on the back, and went over to get in the front passenger seat. I'll ride with you guys, Taylor said. Caleb can go with Murph. Sure, Caleb shrugged. See you guys at the forest? Aiden nodded. Yup. It was a 15-minute ride to Janus Forest, the two vehicles following the dirt path that led to the party spot. As soon as they were out of their cars, a bunch of faces crowded them, calling out their names and exchanging handshakes or shoulder pats. Nathan had the bulk of the attention, though, since he was the one nearly everyone knew, and this made it easy for Aiden to slip through people undisturbed to get bottles of liquor for the group, while nodding along to the loud music. For the first hour at the party, Aiden was constantly roped into conversations with people who were so inebriated that everything they said was slurred. And when things started to get a little hands-on, he'd slip away so he could have about 5 minutes of quiet before another drunk approached him. During one of his slipaways, he encountered Caleb leaning against a tree, drinking straight from a bottle of vodka, staring into the distance longingly. Aiden tracked Caleb's gaze and smirked when he saw the person who had all of his attention. She was standing in the midst of her friend group, laughing heartily every few seconds and passing around a cigarette. She had short black hair, light brown skin, and was wearing a white hoodie over gray sweatpants. She wore thick-framed glasses, so it was hard to tell where she was looking sometimes. But Aiden could have sworn she was shooting glances in Caleb's direction every few seconds. Aiden grinned, drew in a deep breath, and walked toward Carmen Willow. He strode straight into the midst of their friend group, exchanged nods with most of them, locked arms with Carmen, and started to steer her away. Sorry about this, guys, but I just need to borrow Carmen for a minute. What are you doing? Carmen queried. But Aiden didn't respond until they were out of the earshot of her friend group. Go talk to him. If I have to watch you guys sneak glances at each other one more time, I'll kill myself. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you don't, Aiden snorted. Go on, if you don't. I'm going to have to listen to him go on and on about how he wished tonight had gone differently, and trust me, it's hell. Carmen sighed. I don't know what to say. You'll figure it out. Bye. Aiden started to walk away, but he didn't get far before someone reached out from behind a tree, grabbed his arm, and yanked him. Before he knew what was happening, hands were around his face, and someone else's lips were pressed against it. He closed his eyes and leaned into the kiss, wrapping his arms around the girl's waist and hoisting her up against the tree. After a minute, Aiden pulled away and stared into her brown eyes. You realize your brother's going to kill me if he finds out. "I'll kill him if he kills you," Taylor grinned, and found his lips with hers once more. Nathan found Murphy by the grill. "Hey, Murph," Nathan called out to him and hurried to meet him. "You got any more cigars?" "Yeah, sure." Murphy nodded and pulled his cigarette pack out and tossed it to Nathan. "Sweet," Nathan grinned. He glanced around warily, stepped closer to Murphy, and spoke in a hushed tone. "You put the good stuff in yet?" Murphy nodded. "Yeah, just don't do too much." "When do I ever?" Nathan snorted. "Where's your sister, by the way?" "Oh, I saw her sneaking off to your car with Aiden," Murphy answered and nodded in the direction of Nathan's car. Nathan glanced at his car, which was rocking back and forth, then looked at Murphy with a frown on his face. "Why aren't you angry?" "You're joking, right?" Murphy snorted. "I've known about the two of them since they got together on my last birthday. It's just fun watching them sneak around so I don't find out." "You're a sick bastard," Murphy grinned. "I know." For a while, the party was great. Every few minutes, there'd be multiple groups of two headed deeper into the woods for some much-needed privacy. Or there'd be an uproar after someone fell off a keg. It looked like it might have been the best party Nathan Christensen had ever thrown. And then came the scream. It was a piercing scream, one that came from deep in the woods and could be heard well over the thumping music. As soon as the scream was heard, much of the talking and dancing and making out and whatever else came to a halt, and everyone stared off into the distance the chilling scream had come from. On Nathan's instruction, the music ended. "What was that?" someone whispered. "Did you hear that? Where do you think it came from? Do we check it out? I think we should call the cops." Seconds later, Aiden popped up in front of Nathan and Murphy, his hair rough, his white tee stained with smidges of lipstick. Shortly after he arrived, Taylor arrived too, looking just as disheveled as he did. "Where were you guys?" Murphy asked, arching one eyebrow over the other. Aiden cleared his throat. "I was getting drinks and hanging out with Todd and a few others." "Really?" Murphy nodded. "Yeah, I guess that makes sense." He looked at Taylor. "What about you?" "Same thing," said Taylor quickly. "Drinks and Todd." "You don't like Todd," Murphy pointed out. "People change." "Guys, shut the fuck up," Nathan hissed. "What do you think that was? You think someone got hurt?" "That, or it's a bunch of drunk idiots trying to be funny," Murphy shrugged. "I'm sure it's not a big deal." He was proven wrong a second later when someone screamed at the top of their lungs, "Help! Someone help!" That was enough to make people start to worry. Immediately, some people started to file out of the forest, while others stood around, eyes widened in fear, confused about what to do. "All right, guys, party's over," Nathan yelled, and clapped his hands to get everyone's attention. "It's time to go." Caleb and Carmen joined the group then, both of them wild-eyed and appearing out of breath. Aiden exchanged grins with Caleb, but chose not to ask any questions. Once enough people had left or started to leave, Aiden pulled out his phone and turned on his flashlight. The others did the same. They all looked at each other and exchanged nods. "If you see some psycho out there, don't be stupid. Just run," Nathan instructed all of them. Murphy snorted. "You don't have to tell me twice." And so, deeper into the woods they went, illuminating their path with their flashlights. With everyone already nervy, it didn't help that Caleb yelped whenever the wind rustled the leaves on the trees and made their shadows move. As they progressed deeper into the woods, Aiden started to fear that someone might suggest splitting up, but thankfully no one did. For 20 more minutes, they walked deeper and deeper into the woods, and Aiden was on the brink of declaring it was a false alarm when they found him. He was spread-eagled on the ground, facing up so his fear-widened eyes were focused on the moonlight. His clothes had been shredded by what looked like a lot of claw marks, and his blood was everywhere. But he wasn't dead. Not yet. His chest was still heaving. "Holy fuck," Aiden murmured. "Is that Darren?" Caleb asked. "Call 911, Nathan yelled. Aiden got closer to the boy while the others maintained their distance, glancing around warily. Taylor was frantically attempting to unlock her phone so she could call for help. Aiden crouched beside the boy and squinted at his face. He recognized the boy. Darren Whitmore. They'd been in the same class in high school. "Aiden," Darren choked. "Lila. It got Lila." Aiden looked back at the others, all of whom had heard Darren and now looked pale with fear. He turned his attention back to Darren. "You're going to be fine. We're going to get you help. Just stay with us, okay?" He lifted Darren's shirt so he could see how bad the wound was, and the sight he beheld was strong enough that he almost puked there and then. Whatever had done this to Darren must have been pretty strong, and must have had very sharp claws, because it had sliced very deep. Deep enough that Aiden could see Darren's guts. "I can't," Darren choked. "I know I'm going to die, but you gotta get out of here, man. It's still here. You gotta run." "What's still here?" Carmen asked fearfully. "What did this? Was it a bear?" As if on cue, there was a frightening guttural growl then, one that came from pretty close by. As soon as Aiden heard it, he straightened up and hastily backed away from Darren, backing up against the others, all 6 of them pointing their flashlights around. Twigs snapped then, and Aiden saw something very big and very fast blur between some of the trees. He wasn't the only one who'd seen it, since Nathan let out a very loud whimper then. "That's not a bear," Aiden said grimly. "What do we do?" Caleb squeaked. "Run, you fucking dumbass," Murphy hissed. And without saying anything else, he took off. For a moment, everyone stared in confusion, and then, as if all their brains revved to life at the same time, they all bolted. Aiden was the least inebriated of all of them, and perhaps also the most naturally athletic. So it wasn't a surprise to anyone when he rapidly overtook Murphy, who'd gotten a head start on all of them. Right behind Murphy were Caleb and Taylor, with Carmen and Nathan at the rear of the group. As they ran, their feet thudded powerfully against forest ground, snapping twigs in their wake. But from somewhere behind them came thunderous footsteps. Footsteps that could not possibly be human. And even if the footsteps did belong to a very large, very fast person, there was no way a person could let out the growls and snarls they were hearing. A yell came from behind Aiden, and he glanced over his shoulder to find that Caleb had tripped over an unfortunately placed log. And the strained expression on his face was a pretty damning sign he'd dislocated something. And with none of the others stopping to give him a hand, it was up to Aiden. Aiden cursed under his breath and slid to a stop. He turned around and ran for Caleb, sliding to a crouched stop beside his brother. "Where's the pain?" he asked frantically. "Left ankle," Caleb groaned. "Shit," Aiden cursed, and cast a quick glance around, his mind spinning into overdrive. He spotted some sticks and found some inspiration. 40 seconds later, he'd crafted a makeshift brace and had Caleb's left ankle wrapped delicately in it. "Won't make the pain go away entirely, but you should be able to run." "Is it still behind us?" Caleb asked. Aiden glanced over the log, behind which they were crouched, and squinted, scanning for signs of a large creature. But there was nothing. He couldn't hear any movement either. He thought he smelled something, but he was in a forest, and it was pretty normal for there to be weird smells in there. He shook his head. "No, it must have stopped." "Or it's after the others," Caleb murmured. "Come on, let's go," Aiden said, not wanting to think of the others ending up like Darren. He grabbed Caleb's hand and pulled him onto his feet. Caleb winced a little, but he was able to stay on his feet. "You can move, right?" Aiden asked, eyeing Caleb with concern. Yeah, it's fine," Caleb nodded. "All right, you run ahead of me, I'll be behind you," Aiden instructed, and the two of them took off again. Caleb, despite his ankle, moved with surprising pace, but it was still a lot slower than he'd been going before, which meant Aiden had to move even slower, since there was no way he'd leave Caleb behind. The two of them ran for what felt like forever before they spotted the others up ahead. They were getting pretty close to the clearing where the party had held. Aiden could see the others scrambling for the cars. Nathan, who was about to get into the driver's seat of his Toyota, saw them and started waving frantically at them. "Hurry up!" he screamed. A few more seconds and they'd be safe. And that was when it all went wrong. Aiden saw it too late. The red eyes glowing out of the darkness. The glistening claws as the creature shot out from behind a tree. If Aiden had seen it a second earlier, both he and Caleb might have been left unscathed. But the creature had been very intelligently hidden from plain sight, and now it was going straight for Caleb. The world seemed to slow then, as adrenaline surged intensely through Aiden, and he did the first thing that came to mind. He lunged at Caleb and shoved him forward, well out of the monster's path. So it was he who bore the full brunt and agony of the claws piercing his chest. The moment the claws broke his skin, it felt like his blood had been set ablaze, and a piercing scream of agony escaped him. The monster, now that Aiden had seen it up close, looked a lot like a wolf, except Aiden wasn't sure wolves were supposed to grow that big. The wolf raked its claws across Aiden's chest furiously, then sank its fangs into Aiden's shoulder and flung him across the forest. "Aiden!" Taylor's voice screamed. Trees blurred past Aiden as he sailed through the air, until finally he collided with one with a sickening snap and dropped to the ground hard on his back. He tried to move, but his body failed him. He wanted to look at the others, to be sure they were getting away, but it was like he'd been paralyzed. All he could see was the full moon above, the moonlight illuminating what would likely be his final moments. His vision started to blur, and he was sure that was it. That was the end of the line. It had to be. And then came the convulsing shock, one that shot throughout him without warning, earning an agonized grunt from him, and his body twitched. His blood burned within him like someone had injected acid into his bloodstream, and it felt a lot like his bones were moving around inside him. Slowly, the pain from the wolf's claws started to subside until it was only a dull numb. He wasn't sure what was happening, except that after a few seconds, he found that he could move again. He pushed himself first onto all fours before getting back on his feet, and he started to limp in the direction of the clearing. The others hadn't left yet. In fact, Caleb and Taylor were sprinting toward him. The two of them got closer and closer, and then Aiden roared in sudden agony as the sound of bones snapping came from him. and he dropped onto his knees, dazed by the pain. He attempted to get back up, but more of his bones snapped, and he fell entirely, twisting in unbearable pain. Hands grabbed him and attempted to lift him, but he swatted the hands away. "Go away!" he roared, tears streaming out of his eyes and down his cheeks. "We're not leaving you," Caleb said defiantly, and attempted to lift Aiden up again, but he couldn't. The strain on Caleb's face made it seem like Aiden suddenly weighed the entire world. "Just go!" Aiden roared, sending spit flying in every direction. The next second he was screaming as more of his bones snapped, and the world took on a weird golden hue then, with Caleb and Taylor suddenly looking like they'd been painted red. The two of them were backing away from him now, and even though he didn't know why, he was glad they were leaving. "Run!" he pleaded. It felt like there was something bubbling in his throat, something that needed to be let out. So he let it out and produced an incredibly powerful howl. And then came another bout of excruciating agony. This time it made him black out, and that was it. He was dead. Or that was what he'd believed. And the truth was, he would much rather have been dead than wake up to the sight he did wake up to. It felt like the world had been black for an eternity, and then he woke up. When he woke up, he was still in the forest, and the sun was starting to rise on the horizon. He was covered in blood, but he wasn't in any sort of pain, so he doubted the blood could be his. And then he looked around, and his heart sunk immediately. There was blood everywhere, with claw marks on the trees. But more than that, there were people, too. People he recognized. Nathan, Taylor, Caleb. They were all badly hurt. "No, no, no," he said quickly, his voice cracking, and scrambled toward Caleb. "Caleb! Caleb, wake up!" he roared. Caleb cracked open his eyes weakly and stared uncomprehendingly at Aiden for a few seconds. And then his eyes widened in fear, and he attempted to back away from Aiden. But he was already up against a tree. There was nowhere to go. But the fear in Caleb's eyes was enough to trigger realization in Aiden. The blood he was covered in wasn't his. It was theirs. And he'd done this. There was no doubt about that. He was the monster.
Full Moon Academy. The ebook format is now available on Amazon Kindle. Full Moon Academy in audiobook format is now available on Audible, Apple Music, and Spotify. Full Moon Academy in paperback and hardcover are available worldwide via Amazon.com, and in the Philippines, Full Moon Academy is available in all branches of National Bookstore, Expressions, and also at Shopee and Lazada.